Hello, Pod Smashers of the Internet, and welcome to another 80-Bit Newscast! For the day of February 8th, 2021. We are a weekly news podcast running through the video game news from the week to you folks. Welcome to another one. If you have any questions or comments during our show, you feel free to leave them in chat. Interact with each other in chat, but we will not get to your questions until the last 5 to 10 minutes or so. If you are curious about who we are, if this is your first time joining us, thank you. We are your hosts. I am Termite, and
I am Penguin.
And we are 80-Bit Pod Smash, a weekly gaming podcast that goes live every Monday at midnight. You can find all of the links to that podcast at 80bitpodsmash.com. It's our landing site where all of our podcast platforms, the RSS feed, our socials, they're all there, so go check that out. And if you're coming by way of YouTube, jump over to twitch.tv/80bitpodsmash every Monday night at 8 p.m. for this show right here, where we run you through the weekly news, and every Wednesday evening at 8 p.m. when we play a video game with you with our weekly video game live streams shows. 8 p.m. Wednesday nights. So, 80-Bit Pod Smash everywhere. Here we are. What are we talking about tonight?
Tonight we are talking about a lot of different things. And we are going to start by talking about a potential acquisition by Sony. Not really an acquisition, but Sony's making some moves with some studios. And so that's going to be our first story we'll talk about. After that, we're going to be talking about a couple of Blizzard games. I've gotten a quasi-update regarding their release windows, so we'll talk about those. Prince of Persia may be facing another delay, so we'll talk about that. Sony released their Q3 earnings for 2020. That includes the PlayStation 5 sales figures, so we'll talk about that. Gearbox has been bought, so we'll talk about who acquired them and what implications it has. E3 has got some news, so we'll talk about that. And finally, there is going to be a discussion at EA about the fate of a certain game, so we'll talk about that. So those are going to be all of our stories. As Termite mentioned, please hold your comments till the end, or release them whenever you want to, and we'll see them. We don't have a particularly active feed, but yes, we will wait till the end to respond to them. So, other than that, shall we jump in? Is there anything else we need to talk about?
That's it. That covers all of our housekeeping.
Oh.
So, Sony has a parent stake in FromSoftware. This is something you are very excited about, and hit me up as soon as it happens.
I'm so excited about this. So, this is a parent stake. It's not an acquisition. It may be a prelude to an acquisition, as in they may be making moves towards FromSoftware, but they are strengthening their relationship by investing capital in the parent company for FromSoftware, which is a group called Kadokawa Industries, I think, or something like that. Kadokawa Group. And so this group owns FromSoftware, and they have invested 1.9% capital, I think. I'm not quite sure exactly what that means, so I don't know if you have the...
of course, I have the news article up ready to go. From GamesIndustry.biz, James Batchelor writes, Sony Corporation has formed a new financial partnership that gives its part ownership of the Japanese media conglomerate that owns FromSoftware, the developer behind Dark Souls and Bloodborne. VGC reports Kadokawa Corporation detailed a new, quote, capital alliance between itself, Sony, and mobile company Cyber Agent, which owns developer Cygames. The alliance gives both partners a 1.93% stake in Kadokawa, which isn't that much, but there it is.
It's not much, but it probably means a lot more than it looks. But nevertheless, it's exciting because there's already a pretty strong relationship between Bloodborne, between FromSoftware and Sony. About half of the games they've released have been exclusive to PlayStation. So there's already a pretty strong relationship there. And even though there was, when I was reading that part of the reason Dark Souls exists is because Sony wouldn't release the IP of Demon Souls to FromSoftware, who wanted to publish their games on other platforms. So there's like a weird kind of like FromSoftware wants to be independent from Sony, but but there's still a close relationship there. Nevertheless, the intent, I believe there was some quote about the intent being to invest more into their shared properties. So it may mean a possible Demon Souls 2, But more importantly for me, it may mean a Bloodborne 2, as you can see on my background. There is a Bloodborne background. So,
yeah, you're excited about that. I would say but it has some implications. I mean, Microsoft's making moves. We know they just acquired the ZeniMax group, which include Bethesda and all of its partners in an exclusivity deal that hasn't gone live yet. So is Sony, attempting to do something here with FromSoftware? Elden Ring's coming out. Maybe it'll be a
It would be a big
deal
get for them, but it wouldn't necessarily be as big as Bethesda. Like,
no,
FromSoftware games are very, very popular, but are also comparatively niche compared to something like Bethesda. It would be it would be a good fit, I think. Sony and FromSoftware would fit well together. But I don't think it would be, it wouldn't be like, it would be big in our circles, but it wouldn't necessarily be big in like, oh my gosh, Skyrim or Elder Scrolls 6 is going to be potentially exclusive to Microsoft. Like, that's a lot bigger of a get, but nevertheless, so cool. I just hope it means that they may be lighting this may be lighting a fire under FromSoftware to get a remaster, PS5 remaster, 60 frames per second version, at least 60 frames per second version of Bloodborne out there. It would be really, really sweet. So.
I wish I knew more about the code. As a software developer myself, I don't know how this would work, but I imagine that developers have put caps like 30 frames per second caps on the software because the frame rate fluctuates so much based on what's happening in the action on screen. So with the power of the PlayStation 5, they could do a patch that checks to see what console it's running on, or at least what horsepower it has, and remove the cap and let it go. Like, I imagine it would be that simple. But who knows?
Who knows? Yep.
Sometimes they're like animations that are tied to the frame rate. So when you release the frame rate, the animations get wonky, and then the timing is off, and then the clipping happens, and like hitboxes are all jacked up. And anyway, I am going on a tangent. What's next? We're talking about Blizzard.
So talking about Blizzard, Activision Blizzard had an earnings call, and at the earnings, they have this every time around this year. In fact, lots of crazy things have happened around this time of year. Right before or around the earnings call a couple years ago, they axed a significant portion of their staff, and it made huge headlines. So nothing quite as dramatic happened at this earnings call, but they did confirm that they quote, do not expect returns from Overwatch 2 or Diablo 4 this year, which is a kind of a strange way of saying that those games aren't coming out, but it's more or less a confirmation that those games aren't coming out this year. So it's not like sorry, I was gonna say, I don't know if they followed up with an official statement saying that the games were delayed, but or not delayed, but not releasing that year or this year. But it's kind of a soft confirmation, one way or another.
Yeah, Activision's chief financial officer Dennis Durkin said, "We expect Blizzard's net bookings to grow given the momentum of World of Warcraft and the other growth initiatives we have in the business. Our outlook does not include Diablo 4 or Overwatch 2 launching in 2021, and while Diablo Immortal is progressing well, and we anticipate its launch later this year, we don't have any material contribution from the title in our outlook presently." Why did that not make any headlines? They anticipate Diablo Immortal releasing later this year. And anyway, in a related quote, Activision's COO, Daniel Allegre, said, "The pipeline is progressing really well, and we anticipate that 2022 will be a great year for Blizzard." Hint, hint, right? There you go. Blizzard boss J. Allen Brack said Overwatch 2 development team passed a, quote, major internal milestone in December that involved testing many of the key features of the game with hundreds of developers across the world. We're happy with how that game is progressing, he added. Now, if only Overwatch 2 and Diablo 4 would come with, bundled in its packaging, a little humanitarian rights and an apology for the Hong Kong protests and their actions. If only, that ship has sailed. That's gone. It's like over the horizon.
Yeah, I was gonna say, as far as Blizzard's concerned, it is last year's controversy, and they have survived it, and they have. I mean, Shadowlands was the best, was the fastest selling PC game of all time, a game, not just expansion to a game of all time. Ridiculous. So, my personal boycott's up by the time these games come out, it'll be up this fall technically, so by the time these games come out, I will probably be able to play them from a personal level. Whether I will or not will depend on reviews. I don't trust Blizzard's brand anymore to say whether I will or not, but so we had a whole conversation about that. You can check out our podcast, and we have a whole conversation about our thoughts on all that and what our own personal actions we were going to be taking regarding it were. So,
Yep.
it's a whole thing. Anyways, either way, I'm not surprised that those games are delayed. As far as the delays themselves go, like, of course they're delayed. Like, this year is just, expect. As I told a friend recently, I said any game that doesn't have a release date on it, like a fixed release date on it, is going to get delayed, because every game that has a fixed release date on it has still gotten delayed. Like, Returnal got pushed back. Everything's getting pushed back. And speaking of pushbacks, our next story is Prince of Persia, which has already gotten a delay, is getting a delay again. So that is just strengthens my point that any game that doesn't have a release date this year, just expect it to be 2020.
Jonathan Dornbush over at IGN says Ubisoft has announced that the Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time remake has been delayed again, this time without a clear new release date in mind. The developers of the remake released a statement on Twitter explaining that we, quote, "We have made the decision to shift the release for Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time remake to a later date. This extra development time will enable our teams to deliver a remake that feels fresh while remaining faithful to the original." So prior to the Cyberpunk debacle, which I'll tie this to that in a minute, I said no one was talking about the effects that COVID-19 and the pandemic would have had on the future games. Everyone was talking about what's happening now. Well, when the pandemic was happening all of last year, that games still came out, because games take 4 to 5 years to develop, and so anything that's coming out during the pandemic were already past. They were on the ends. They were on the post-processing end of things, which is kind of remote, and work from home works really well with. Hence why we got games like Crash 4 and Tony Hawk 1 and 2 and all the. And
we got Final Fantasy, we got Doom, like we got all that stuff. Last of Us, Ghost of Tsushima, all those games came out during the pandemic.
Right, and now we're going to start seeing the shift in the valley of openness of everything that was really affected, like the core development work and efforts being affected and paused and pushed off, because everything that was slated to come out in 2021 has now been pushed. To make that worse, Cyberpunk happened, where we realized this is what happens if you don't delay things and you release stuff too early and you make false promises. On the biggest level, one of the most beloved AAA development studios in the world ate crow. I mean, like, really had a giant slice of humble pie shoved into their gullet. So now we have both things here. I know. I'm trying to be family friendly. And yeah, so I don't know if this Prince of Persia delay yet again is a polish issue, where they just don't want bugs and clipping because they want good publicity when it comes out, so therefore an effect of the Cyberpunk issue, or if this was just more COVID delays. Probably both. But
probably both.
It just continues, delay after delay after delay. What are we even going to play this year? Old stuff. That's what we're going to play.
That's why I'm playing oldies but goodies. Yep. That backlog hard. Play PC games. What? Play your Switch. Do something. Anything.
Buy a PlayStation Vita like I did and play that.
All right. Says the guy who's you're going to play your Xbox games. You're just going to play.
I did that too. I have been.
That's what you're going to do. Yep. Because you have been doing that exactly. All right. Next on our list. So moving away from delays and stuff like that, we can talk about Sony. Also had their earnings call for the Q3 2020, which includes the PlayStation 5 sales figures. Take it away, Termite. What's happening there?
Sam Byford over at The Verge says Sony shipped 4.5 million PlayStation 5 units worldwide in 2020, as revealed by information published alongside the company's latest earnings report. The number highlights Sony's current ability to mass-produce the console, which has been extremely difficult to buy since its launch in November. Demand for the PlayStation 4 dropped dramatically year-on-year, with only 1.4 million units shipped in the October-December quarter, a 77% decrease from the previous year. Sony actually managed to sell fewer PS4s in the holiday quarter than it did from July to September. I didn't realize. That's crazy. Sony's gaming business overall performed much better than a year ago, with analyst Daniel Ahmad noting that it was actually the best quarter in PlayStation history. Revenue increased 40% to 883 billion yen, partly driven by PS5 sales. Operating profit was up 50%. To 80.2 billion yen because of higher game sales, PlayStation Plus subscriptions, and better margins on PS4 hardware. Sony does note, however, that expenses related to the PlayStation 5 launch offset some of its profit gains, and also confirms that the PS5 hardware itself is being sold for less than it costs to make. A loss was incurred due to, quote, strategic price points for the PlayStation 5 hardware that were set lower than the manufacturing costs. There's not much to read into the PS5 sales numbers until people who want to buy one are actually able to do so, but at the very least, the console's launch seems to be broadly comparable in size to PS4. The PS4 also shipped 4.5 million units in its launch quarter. So, there's a little bit to unpack here. It's confirmed here that Sony is selling the PlayStation 5 at a loss.
That's been speculated since long before it came out. That's been speculated since they announced the hardware specs on it, and people were doing the math, and they were like, unless they sell this thing for $800, it's not going to turn a profit.
Right. Considering like to match the graphical performance, you'd have to go buy a video card that by itself would cost $400 to $600. Without a computer even around it to run it. So that also, I was really surprised to see the PlayStation 4 dropped that dramatically. But I guess when you're at 100 and where are they at now? 111 or 110 million units total. Like the install base is kind of capped out as it is.
Right. Yeah. And very few consumers are going to say, "I'm going to buy a brand new PS4."
Right.
At the end of its life cycle. I can see people buying a used one at the end of its life cycle, but they're not going to go out and buy a brand new PS4 and be like, "Give me money for this thing that there's not going to be any games on in 3 years." So. New games on, I should say. So,
but awesome that Sony had the best quarter in PlayStation history. Okay, we've talked at length on our podcast before. The top 5 best-selling consoles of all time, not handhelds, just consoles. 4 of the top 5 are all PlayStations, 1, 2, 3, and 4, with the Wii sitting in there somewhere. To say that PlayStation made more money from October to December quarter of last year than they have ever made in the history of their company, that's insane.
Any quarter.
Right.
It's not that they've made more money now than they may ever, like, their entire life. It just means that they... not cumulatively, but No, it's still very good.
Because everyone's quoting pandemic, people are tight for money, it's hard times, but maybe the pandemic has helped them because of all of these extras.
I was going to say, and all indications seem to be that at least the video game industry has thrived, and we talked about that at length during our podcast too, is... gaming is relatively a cheap hobby when you consider you can't go out and spend money on drinks, and you can't go out and spend money at bars and clubs and breweries, and so when you're stuck at home, you're actually saving. People are like, "Oh, I'll buy some more video games because I got all this. I'm not spending this money on other stuff." So, and yes, the cost per entertainment ratio is very high with video games. So, I can see them making a pretty good buck.
And just how easy it is to buy games digitally now. During the PlayStation 3, Xbox 360 era, it was like a huge deal to see a big AAA title available digitally on the market, at least initially. At first it was tons of indies and like arcade games and stuff that you could buy digitally, but to see like Assassin's Creed Valhalla, it's just boom, here it is. Day one, like you could buy it digitally. So then the pandemic also, you're not going to the store, or you maybe can't find it online somewhere. You just buy it digitally, and then Sony takes more profits off those digital sales. And so here you are, like
there's so many factors as to why Sony might have done well. Does it note that it's it is only the gaming business that they're talking about here? It's not just all of Sony reporting.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Great. I was gonna say. So there's their first party exclusives, digital sales. The sales of the consoles themselves, and things like the subscription services, PlayStation Plus, PlayStation Now, all that stuff is probably netting them in a fair chunk of revenue. They probably have more subscribers for PS Plus now than they've ever had, due to things like Fall Guys being super popular. I bet you they made a big chunk of change when people wanted to get in on that craze, and people were like, "Well, great, I'll re-up my PlayStation Plus subscription." So there's all kinds of factors there. So cool. Shall we move on?
Let's go.
Moving along, chugging right through. This is some pretty big news. We talk about Gearbox a lot because both of us are big Borderlands fans. Came out this week that Borderlands has been purchased by the Embracer Group, which is the same parent company that owns THQ Nordic. So, so what does that mean for Borderlands, though, which is the only thing I really cared about regarding Gearbox? After that announcement came out, then 2K released their own statement saying that they will still be the publishing entity for Borderlands specifically, and that they will continue to work with Gearbox to create future installments in the Borderlands franchise. So, unpacking all that, what does it mean? It's kind of complicated, but it sounds like the bottom line is that Gearbox will be making new IPs, and all of their other IPs that they don't have much, but they'll be making all their other like new installments and their other IPs or remasters of their other IPs, partnering with Embracer Group and their subsidiaries to make those. But it sounds like they're mostly doing it in order to make new IPs with Embracer Group's subsidiaries, and they will continue to also work on the Borderlands franchise, which will be then published through 2K. So Gearbox is sort of straddling the fence, it seems like. And I don't know how much of a cut Embracer Group will end up getting out of future Borderlands sales. There's probably some kind of arrangement between them and 2K, but 2K is still going to be the ones who publish Borderlands. So
it is a little convoluted. It's a little confusing. But what we're talking about,
I want to know who owns the IP. Does Gearbox own the IP for Borderlands?
2K
or 2K
does. 2K does.
So 2K could at any point say, we're going to make the next Borderlands game without Gearbox.
Yep.
Yeah.
So 2K said in their statement, the merger does not change 2K's relationship with Gearbox, nor our role as the publisher for the Borderlands IP. So that quote right there says that they are the publisher for Borderlands IP. Therefore, they own the rights. 2K does, of Borderlands IP. So,
well, yeah, but IP can be tricky in the sense that, like, what I want to know is, can they make it, like, do they have an arrangement where Gearbox owns the creation rights of? It's possible that, like, Gearbox owns the intellectual property, but 2K owns the publishing rights for the IP. Meaning, if a break were to happen between these two entities in any kind, then 2K may still not be able to make Borderlands games because they couldn't just give it to another developer because they might not own the actual creation rights to the IP. I don't know. I just don't know.
Yeah.
But it sounds like both companies are more or less still tied together right now, but I don't know who ultimately can pull the plug.
Mm-hmm.
We'll
and
see.
that would, that's like an exclusive deal between 2K, the publisher, and Gearbox, the developer studio, in the existing contracts that have already been in place, in deals that they already have about specifically related to Borderlands. So when the Embracer comes in, yet another publishing group that's even higher up has THQ Nordic under it. So THQ Nordic and 2K Games are kind of peers. They're both publishing companies. Gearbox is one step lower. They're a development studio. And so what we're talking about is this bridge, this link between 2K and Gearbox is the Borderlands IP. Can THQ Nordic suddenly start publishing Borderlands? Absolutely not. That would never happen. Not unless they completely sold the IP. So we know that there's a weird connection here between Embracer, who now owns Gearbox, and then Gearbox's current existing deal with 2K off on the side, and what that looks like
so what,
specific to
what
Borderlands.
Changes? Very little changes in regards to Borderlands. In fact, nothing changes in regards to Borderlands. What does change, though, is that you might see Gearbox making more stuff. So they'll probably be hiring a lot more personnel, or absorbing people from other Embracer Group subsidiaries. But yeah, that's how that's going to work.
Crazy and fascinating and interesting inner workings of the video game industry.
Everyone's getting snatched up. There's a big acquisitions craze right now that we haven't seen. I don't think I've seen this much studio acquisition since I've been following the games industry for this podcast. So since we started this podcast, I feel like this last year has just been like there have been small sales happening here and there. Insomniac is one that comes to mind, happening with Sony. But
how about Microsoft acquiring 8 new development studios?
Those, but they were all smaller development studios. Now we're seeing big development studios getting, like, it's almost like everyone's picking sides right now. It's interesting. So,
as I quote the great Gary Whitta, one of the writers of Star Wars Rogue One, he says, "If you're not moving, if you're not making moves, you're standing still." And that what we're seeing is movement. So
if anyone wants to buy us, Sony, Microsoft, if you're listening, you can buy us. We'd be happy to be an exclusive podcast for Sony or Microsoft or whatever. Just saying, just throwing it out there. All right.
E3, speaking of developers and publishers, we're going to talk about one of the biggest events happening in gaming every year, and the annual
event
of
happened to E3 last year?
E3 didn't happen last year because of a pandemic.
What?
This year, and the history of E3 has kind of been in the center of conversations all about it and its relevancy anyway, and the pandemic kind of prove? What's the past tense for proof? Proved?
Proved. ED.
Proved. Why am I like
Prove
words? Hurt?
It proves it, yo.
The pandemic proved that E3 was kind of irrelevant anyway, but here we are. And the ESA, the Entertainment Software Association, Adam Bankhurst at IGN writes, has confirmed that my gosh, E3 2021.
We don't even know what this thing is anymore because we haven't had it in so long.
We're just randomly throwing letters together.
E3, EPELG.
IGN. E3 2021 will happen as a digital event. In a statement to IGN, the ESA has confirmed the return of one of the biggest video game conferences after it was canceled in 2020. They say, quote, "We can confirm that we are transforming the E3 experience for 2021 and will soon share exact details on how we're bringing the global video game community together," a spokesperson from the ESA said. "We are having great conversations with publishers, developers, and companies across the board, and we're looking forward to sharing details about their involvement soon." This news follows a report from VGC in which E3 2021 pitch documents sent to game publishers have outlined the proposal that would see 3 days of live-streamed coverage from the previously announced dates of June 15th through the 17th of this year. The plan also includes having multiple 2-hour keynote sessions from game partners, an awards show, a June 14th preview night, and other smaller streams from game publishers, influencers, and media partners. There's one last thing that's going to be here. Partner companies are going to be allowed to remotely stream playable game demos to media across thousands of scheduled meetings alongside one-on-one assistance from developers. This sounds insane.
Yeah.
And very ambitious.
Yeah.
And it sounds like a lot to happen in one, like from the 14th through the 17th over 3 days. Multiple 2-hour keynote sessions. So those are probably Sony, Microsoft, maybe Nintendo. An entire awards show. Smaller streams from game publishers, influencers, and media partners. That's like bringing in other.
Show?
Yeah, that's what it says. An award show. Yep.
In the middle of the year, in the summer.
Yep.
Like,
I don't know if that means like the broad award show or if it's going to be like, oh, this is the best racing game presented at E3. Like those, the E3 awards. Like, this is the most anticipated shooter from E3.
Right. I see what you're saying.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know what that's going to look like, but it sounds like a lot. It's going to be lit.
They're trying. It sounds like they're trying to make up for last year. Sounds
right?
like they have all this money that they. I don't know if they saved money or spent money for the year 2020. But it's just interesting because like E3 happened right around the time when like in the pandemic, like it was early enough in the pandemic where like companies hadn't figured out, like events had not figured out how to yet pivot to being online only events. Mm-hmm. We would see that with Sony and Microsoft's conferences regarding the PlayStation and the Xbox. We'd see them become all digital events. And we've seen that with, so many things. Like even the Super Bowl had like digital elements to it. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? That's fairly controversial because that may not have been done as elegantly as it could have been, but c'est la vie. Anyways, so yeah, it's just interesting that like E3 was one of the first kind of victims of the pandemic that like it was early enough where companies hadn't figured out how yet to do it, so it just got axed. It just got completely canceled, and that kind of sucked for them. But as you said, we kind of survived anyways. Like the games industry was still able to generate plenty of hype and make plenty of money without it. So it's interesting to consider its relevancy. So it'll be interesting to see who plays ball with it this year regarding. Like, is Microsoft going to be involved? Is Sony going to be involved? Sony sort of swore off E3 even before it got canceled last year, so... And
what we also don't know is prior to the pandemic even happening, Sony had already announced they're backing out of E3 entirely. Remember, like, we went nuts looking at floor plans saying, how is this giant section of E3, the floor booth, like, going to be filled with what? And then... Jeff Keighley, he also said he backed out of E3 2020 entirely because they were going in a different direction that he wanted to do. And so when the pandemic happened, that allowed Jeff Keighley to do his Summer Games Fest, and we saw what Sony was doing with their digital conferences and such. So like E3 was really in tatters last year before it even got canceled. And so now we have this. Is Sony going to participate? Is Jeff Keighley going to be involved?
Big thing to pay attention to. I'm very interested over the next couple of months to see who is and is not going to be on Team E3. So Cool.
And this could be the start of a forever virtual E3. If the internet infrastructure can handle these game demos that they're going to be doing live over the internet, like using technologies like Twitch and such to live stream. Like, I can watch Alana Pierce play whatever crazy new game is coming out and get all of her live thoughts right there without having to wait for her to go back and write a whole review and like make a video and then like we get it right then and there. That's way more appealing as a consumer to get that like instant live feedback. So if that's what E3 turns into, then why spend the money on plane tickets and get everybody shoved into a giant convention center and go through the hassle of stressing everybody out for 3 days? Who knows? We'll see. I think the digital way is gonna take.
Cool. All right. Well, we have one more story, so get your thoughts out now, or forever hold your peace. And this one will be quick. Coming to us from Bloomberg, our good friend Jason Schreier, even though we've never met him, but I feel like we're probably going to be friends.
Yeah.
So our good friend
Could you
Jason
imagine?
Schreier, yeah, right, mentions that he wrote an article saying that Electronic Arts Incorporated will hold a meeting this week to determine whether it will continue trying to create a new version of the failed online game Anthem, according to 3 people familiar with the matter. So we, again, at great lengths have talked about Anthem on this podcast. I even played it and enjoyed it for a while when it first came out. But the game's development was fraught, to say the least, and it did not do so well. And it was supposed to be a games as a service, live service, constantly getting updated game. But they, because of its poor reception, poor performance, and just overall awful design, they kind of went back to the drawing board with the intentions of re-releasing it with a whole planned overhaul to make it better, which of course then they then BioWare and its subsidiary and its alternate locations or whatever, alternate teams began to kind of like drop like flies. Their like lead designers kept dropping, like either dropping out or getting moved or whatever. They're in particular, after a bunch of EA people left, then executive producer Christian Daly, who was put in charge of the Anthem project, wrote 3 blog posts last year outlining some of the big changes planned, but in December, Daly left Anthem's team as part of BioWare management shakeup, leaving the fate in question. So he got moved to Dragon Age, I think. And so now everyone's wondering what's going to happen with Anthem, and so EA apparently is meeting this week to discuss that. So by next week, we may have news as to what's happening with Anthem.
Yep.
Which is, because it's disappointing because, again, EA insisted, because even after the game was received poorly, EA insisted, we aren't giving up on Anthem, we're going to fix it, we're going to make it better, we're going to overhaul it, and they want to make a success story like No Man's Sky or Destiny, and that's all in question now, so.
Yeah, Final Fantasy 14 is another example of an amazing overhaul that was incredible. I don't even think No Man's Sky is as good as a turnaround as Final Fantasy 14 was. But again, this was all planned and executed, and all these things happened before a pandemic. And then now the pandemic happens, bandwidth is already limited, and then you have all these resources making Dragon Age 4. So when the meeting says determine whether it will continue trying to create a new version of the game or not, like this could be, the news could literally be, we're canceling Anthem 2.0. It's done.
Yep. It's done.
And I kind of think, like, if I had to hedge a bet, I would probably say they're going to cancel it. Because at this point, Dragon Age 4 needs to be amazing. Because Cyberpunk, the wake of Cyberpunk is there. And if you could fill that spot, what Cyberpunk failed to deliver, and with Dragon Age being just as kind of robust, dialogue-heavy, story-based driven RPG, like, EA can make some, BioWare could come back as a better developer. It'd be a better success story to nail Dragon Age 4 than it would be to resurrect Anthem. If you had to pick one or the other, you can't have both, not in COVID times, I'm guessing. Like, that's my speculation. That's the reason why I would hedge the bet that they are going to cancel it and announce it this week.
I would agree with that assessment. I don't have any final thoughts. One last tiny little bit, though, since you did mention Final Fantasy 15. This is a little bonus news story for you, but 14. Bonus news story. Final Fantasy 14 announced its 6th expansion, Endwalker, and a new healing class called the Sage. Apparently some of the story will be taking place on, some of the content will be taking place on that world's moon. So that could be interesting as well.
That sounds so good. I want to play it so bad.
It's supposed to wrap up, like, kind of the major story arc they've been doing since Realm Reborn. It's not the end of Final Fantasy 14, but it is kind of wrapping up a big story arc. So Should be pretty cool. So, anyways, that is all. We don't seem to have any chat. So, Termite, go ahead and close us out with last minute plugging, I guess, self plugs.
So, if you are new to us, don't know where we are Penguin and Termite of 80-Bit Pod Smash. You can find a weekly video game podcast smashing together ideas that you care about with video games. We are where gaming goes to grab a beer every midnight at Monday over at 80bitpodsmash.com. You will find links to all of our podcast platforms, and if you like us and you want to continue to support us, make sure you click the bells and the subscribes and all of the things to keep notified of what we're doing, because sometimes I buy Resident Evil 4 on a whim while I'm traveling, and I come back and play it, and it's amazing, and I want to talk about it, so I might just go live and do that, but you wouldn't know unless you're subscribed to us. So please subscribe to us on Twitch and on YouTube to be notified when we go live and when we post new videos. Speaking of YouTube, we will drop these videos up for video on demand consumption, and you can find a link to our YouTube page over at 80bitpodsmash.com as well. Jump into our Discord server, interact with our friends, with you folks. It would be great to have you, and without further ado, we are going to go record a podcast.
Adieu. Later.
Have a good week.